Voor de grote januari special ben ik naar Milton Keynes afgereisd om af te spreken met oud-performance engineer van Red Bull Racing en Force India Blake Hinsey. Om te kijken wat hij te zeggen heeft over de Formule 1, wat hij verwacht van het 2023 seizoen. Nou, dat doe ik niet alleen, dat doe ik ook samen met mijn Engelstalige collega Oliver Wilson. Hij doet namelijk het interview en ik mag het lekker draaien. Quickfire preview with Blake Hinsey on the 2023 season coming up. All right, Blake, first and foremost, Red Bull dominated last season. Are we going to see some RB18 copies lining up on the grid from other teams this year?
We saw plenty of them last year, though, didn't we? We saw a couple of them. No, I think a lot of teams understand where their strengths and weaknesses are from their packages. So will you see some emulation and taking bits and pieces? Yes. But at the same time, a lot of the times if you just copy something and you don't understand exactly what it is, it won't perform. And I think we saw that a couple of times last season. But I think you will see people taking some inspiration, but also I think it sounds like Mercedes are sticking with the no pods concept as well. So, you know, they definitely feel that there's something strong in that philosophy, and they weren't able to exploit it last year. Maybe next year, and they've got until the new regs come out in 2026 to make the most out of that. So
they're following their own yellow brick road.
Yeah, exactly, and
kind of thing.
That's kind of admirable. They know how to win a championship. They know how to make an awesome car. But I think you saw last season a couple of teams hedged bets on certain design philosophies and concepts, and then you had all sorts of other stuff. You had the porpoising and everything else, which probably threw a massive wrench in a lot of teams' works. But I think you'll see some people taking some inspiration from it. But I think a couple of people, or a couple of teams, will definitely stay on their path.
As a former engineer in the sport, why was that RB18 so dominant last year compared to others? Was it the power unit? Was it a combination of everything? Or were they right on point with the design of the car?
I think anytime you get into new regs, you had new tires. I think those improved the racing some bit because you could see guys pushing up against the other teams flat out for several laps in a row without tires overheating. That was good. But you had the hugest change in regulations in ages, which was the aerodynamics regulations. And I think there's a lot of uncertainty when you go from wind tunnel and CFD and your simulation tools into the track. It's not perfect. It's not a science. If it was a science, Mercedes would not have had such a difficult year last year. So to that extent, I would say that Red Bull hedged a couple of bets that paid off. The things that I noticed was it seemed like the car had a very broad window, whereas other teams notoriously focus on a very peaky car. And if the peak that you've designed your car for, you can't operate it there, you're going to take a penalty when adapting the car to work elsewhere. It sounds like Red Bull just hit the nail on the head on quite a few things. The power unit was very strong, reliable enough, let's say.
It got there.
It got there, exactly. And the same thing is like 4 power units. No teams are getting through the season on 4. People are burning a couple of jokers. Just, they take the hit, so be it. I think they had a very good car this year because they had a broad window that could operate in a lot of places, and it was the slippy, high speed, low drag car was a feature that we saw that wasn't usually attribute to a Red Bull car. Usually the Red Bull's slower in a straight line, a lot more downforce, but they seem to make something else work this year.
Now you go over a lot of data still when it comes to Formula 1 and looking and analysing the races that we see. What would maybe, definitely me as more of a layman to Formula 1 compared to yourself, that's an over-exaggeration. What have you noticed that maybe the sofa viewer hasn't seen from the data you've seen over the last 12 months in F1?
I think a lot of this stuff became kind of clear from the results as well. Like you saw, Ferrari was very strong initially. Then we got into all of the porpoising. Then they started making some regulations that pushed teams away from them. We saw that in Baku, but realistically what happened in Baku wasn't porpoising. It was the fact that teams were pushing the cars set up so extreme, and you had bottoming, like the car smashing into the ground, which was causing most of the problems. And then the teams learned from that because, like, right, the FIA is not going to let us keep trying to destroy our drivers' backs. We have to do something else. But I think a lot of the stuff was like Ferrari taking the hit after the summer break in terms of overall performance. Was that engine? It's hard to say because Red Bull at the low downforce circuits was insanely fast. I think Mercedes still has a lot longer to go because there's a little bit of recency bias at the end of the season that there were some of those high downforce or low efficiency tracks where they went quite well, but I still think they were looking at the numbers and gaps on a range of circuits. Mercedes was still fairly far off. They weren't the second fastest team. Never mind Russell's pole in Hungary, fine, but that's just a super high downforce track. If you go to an average, I still think they were about 0.5% off, which is a chunk.
When you looked at Mercedes though last year, I mean, I could see that they were getting closer towards the end of the season, obviously. Did you recognise that was coming from what you knew from Formula One and looking at data or anything? Or
it was super hard to tell, and a lot of that stuff is, there's so many, like you're looking at last weekend and something's changed, they've brought an upgrade or a small tweak or something for the next weekend, and me being somebody that's not particularly interested in looking at the way the cars look and the surfaces, because I'm not an aerodynamicist. I like looking at data, and I do have access, or everybody has access to a fair bit of telemetry, except I just have the experience of looking at that telemetry in context of a lot of other stuff, so I can understand a little bit more. But no, it's really hard to look at one race and say, for sure they're going to do better here, because we saw some things. It's like, there were a couple instances where I was surprised by that. It's like, okay, wasn't really sure where to put them for Mexico, because, you run the highest downforce configuration you've got, but it's also one of the fastest tracks in the circuit because the ambient pressure is so low. So it's like, okay, where are they going to be? Is it high downforce track or low downforce track? And it was one of those things where you put as much downforce on the car, and the more downforce you tend to put on the car, the faster the Mercedes did go relatively. Is that down to their performance characteristics of their car and aerodynamics, or because their engine doesn't appear to be as strong this year? Still not particularly clear to me.
Mercedes made those big steps last year. Do you expect them to be the team that's made the biggest improvement going into the 2023 season, or will there be another that will perhaps?
Well, I guess in the same way, it was hard to tell from one race to the next, like, is Team A or Team B going to do well here? Is this going to be an Alpine or McLaren, or maybe we're going to see Haas have another good weekend? I think what we know about that team and their resources and their past championships, I think Mercedes, there's no way they're not going to improve and make another good step into next year. I think for sure that is. But like in terms of the midfield, who's going to step back up, I think probably you might see McLaren, because Daniel struggled like that with the car, and if both of their drivers are vibing well with that new car, I think you'll see them take back that spot. I think, will they be challenging Mercedes Ferrari? That's hard to say. But I definitely think we're going to see Mercedes closer to the front, inside that 0.5%, hopefully within that 0.2% to the front. Because when you're there, you can pick up the pieces, and if your opponents have some struggles, you can capitalize on that, which they did very well this season. They were always there to pounce when either the Ferrari had an issue or one of the Red Bulls had an issue. They were always capitalizing on that.
How much inside that 0.5% gap then is the budget cap breach from Red Bull, the limitation on testing? Is that going to affect Red Bull at all going into this year? Is it going to drop them back by 0.5%?
It's really hard to say, because this is the first time that we've had this, not only that you have the wind tunnel or aero development restriction penalty that they've had as a result of the cost cap breach, but you also have the sliding scale of where teams, how much aero development they get depending on where they finish. So you get penalized the higher up you finished. So I think we're not going to see that play out until this year in testing, the first couple of races, and as the wider grid and in that that mechanism trying to level out the field a bit. I don't think we're going to see that until next year, honestly.
He's sitting on the fence with the answer, basically, is what I'm hearing.
No, I really don't. So that's a fair point. I don't think outright did losing that wind tunnel time from the cost cap breach, is it going to hurt them? Yes. Is it going to make them uncompetitive? No. I think is the answer, because there's kind of two sides to that, isn't there? It's like, is it going to screw them completely? No, I think they've got a fair amount of performance in hand, and I feel like Ferrari probably don't have their issues sorted. They've just got a new team principal. So it's like, there's all sorts of chaos. Mercedes has stability and a lot of learning. And just as Ferrari was maybe figuring it out, they've shaken the pot up again, so. that
Ferrari situation is going to be interesting with Fred Vasseur. Is he the right man to lead Ferrari 2023?
I have no idea. Like, pick anybody out of a hat and throw them in there. It seemed like a tough position to fill in a team with as much depth as that. It's every couple of years is a new team principal, and it's almost, this is our year, or isn't it? It would be good to see them actually in the mix, though, fighting for the championship all the way to the end. I thought this year was it. I really did.
We're in Milton Keynes. You need to be careful what you say. There are Red Bull people around the place hearing you say.
I know.
Let's move away from the top teams. Nico Hülkenberg's back.
I almost forgot about that. He's back.
Nico Hülkenberg's back. The Hulk is back.
The Hulk is back.
Is the Hulk going to be back, or is Nico Hülkenberg a stopgap, a filler, if you will?
I think that's a very interesting appointment, and I like Nico, because he was on the other car when I was at Force India. He's a good driver. Is he going to be better in 2 years than Mick would be in 2 years? I have no idea, and that's super hard to tell. It seems like Mick didn't really, he was just maybe finding his feet and had a couple of moments in the middle of the season where we're like, all right. But now it's super hard to say. It's a really weird appointment, and I think it doesn't make any sense to me. But is he going to do well? I think so. He'll do all right. Is Kevin going to smash him up? Maybe.
Interesting dynamic at Haas as well with those two.
It's going to be great, those two. Some very interesting dialogue between those two in the past at different teams as well.
That's a fun team principal meeting with those two and Gunther. Yeah. Keep the doors closed on that one.
Exactly. Don't let Drive to Survive in there with their microphones. Oh my goodness. Or do.
There's a lot of bleeping taking place on that. What about a lot of the discussion last year, and particularly one of the biggest frustrations for fans, was the wet weather tyres, the lack of driving in wet weather racing. Pirelli apparently are trying to change that, make wet weather tyres for this season that are going to be more adept at actually being used in wet weather conditions. Do you think we're actually going to see that?
Well, there was like a whole spectrum of discussions, and I will admit that I'm not an expert on tyres or wet weather tyres, but there was two things. It was like there was either reluctance from the race director to want to run wets because visibility concerns, and that's a reality of open-wheeled racing with, super extreme wet weather tires. You have to move a lot of water. Where does the water go? Up into the air, reduces visibility. But it seemed like a lot of times the race director just didn't want to run them. We had Suzuka, we had Singapore, where they basically just ran around on inters the entire time and then finally risked putting on dries. But I don't know. That's a super weird one. I feel like, you had Belgium the other year where there was not a race because it was just too wet. Do you need monsoon tires? Do you need a better wet weather tire? And I don't know. It seems like a lot of people trying to shift it's them, it's us. They told us to do this. We don't want to do that. So it's like, I don't know.
Is it too tentative when it comes to water in Formula One?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think so.
We're going to America 3 times.
Yeah.
You're obviously an American. Don't worry, we'll get the USA chant in the background. Is Formula One losing something by going perhaps to places like America and a lot of the newer tracks that we're seeing around the world to some extent, and negating the traditional European classic circuits? Yeah. Or is this the right way to go for Formula One for building the global brand? Considering expanding the season at this point just doesn't seem like it's a thing that can happen.
Yeah, and it sucks to see tracks like Hockenheim struggling to make it. I mean, you can go one way or the other on Monaco. Personally, it's a great event. It's a crap race. The event, the spectacle, everything around it is awesome, but it's not really a good race. That's my opinion. And
should it stay on the calendar or not, Monaco?
Probably, yeah.
Okay.
I would be sad if it wasn't on the calendar, but you lose Spa-Francorchamps, and it's like that's one of the best circuits we still have. It's like tracks like Suzuka. Those are insane circuits with those need to be on the calendar. But there's a discussion of are these new street circuits in America and everywhere else, are they ruining the sport? It's like, well, it depends. Baku's been one of the most exciting racetracks we've had in a while. It's crazy. The first time we went to Baku, we thought it was going to be a terrible race. But there's been some awesome stories from that. Not all of them happy ones. 2018 was tough if you're a Red Bull fan, but you're starting to see that you don't have to have these classic historic circuits with all this stuff. Like Miami, take it or leave it. Austin's a great track. Is Vegas gonna be good? I have no idea. We'll see when we get there. Like Miami was, people were upset with Miami, but statistically at the time, Miami had an insane amount of overtakes. And it was a good race. The problem at that point looked like it was more race direction, more than anything, to not highlight that the fact that these new cars and these new regulations were actually working quite well. I think it's probably the right way to go, and if you don't like it, then we can roll back the clock until Bernie Ecclestone was running F1 and you didn't have drivers being able to post content or media. What's the answer? Put it in front of new fans, for new people. USA is, the American market is loving Formula One right now. They could probably get into, if you look at geographically, the region is huge. It's massive. And then you look at Europe, it's like, well, if you're going to Belgium, you could go to Monza. It's the same as, it's like, I don't know the scale, but it's like from Florida to Vegas, that's a very large distance. But then again, like, who's going to be able to afford to go to Vegas? So who knows?
We're still saving on that one, I think, for the...
Yeah, exactly. When are you guys going?
$100,000 for the weekend package. Yeah,
that's fine.
Might be able to save a few pennies, see what we can do.
Yeah, you get 20 people in and like 3 people can go a day.
Who's going to win it? 2023, winning constructor and winning driver.
I think it's going to be Max and Red Bull again, unless something else changes. I think Ferrari seem like they've got a lot of problems right now. Mercedes on the back foot. And I think Mercedes have another one in them in the next couple of years. Is it this year, next year? I don't know. But they're not going to sit still, are they? Like they don't show up just to participate. They need to be going for the win, and they will be. I think Max and Red Bull, building off of, because I mean the next couple of years until the next power unit change in 26 is going to be an evolution year on year, and I think Red Bull do a pretty good job on especially they usually start off the seasons poor and build up to it, whereas this season they started off strong and then lost less performance than everybody else, it seemed like.
Who's best of the rest outside those top three of Ferrari, Mercedes and Red Bull, and which of the rookie drivers is going to impress the most, not necessarily being that?
I think probably Piastri, McLaren, to answer both those questions in one. I really, like, if McLaren aren't, that team like that's easing into that top 3 and taking some of those points off more frequently, you got to wonder what they're doing. Because I think they will be able to. I think they will be able to. Daniel had a terrible time with that car last season, and that sucked to see, but I think McLaren are definitely going to be back in that spot. I don't see another team that can do it.
We'll be clipping off the Max Verstappen and Red Bull win the titles for the Dutch site, obviously.
Yeah.
But Blake, thanks for the time, man. Appreciate the lowdown on 2023, and enjoy a beer here at the Brewhouse and Kitchen, and we'll settle back, and I'm sure we'll be in contact later on. Cheers. Mate. Thank you.